What is up, ladies and gentlemen? This is Robert Graves bringing you another episode of Year of the Vet. Thank you for tuning back in to Year of the Vet. And if you are tuning in for the first time, welcome. I appreciate you, and you're in for a treat. Because what is Year of the Vet? Year of the Vet is a platform that is created to bring in other veterans out there who have transitioned already, who have transitioned and gone through the questions and the turmoils and the lessons learned, and are here on this platform, Year of the Vet, to give back to you. I wrote a transition book a few years ago that deals with my personal story of 6 years of trying to figure out the ins and outs of how to get along with civilians and how to get along with my family again, and how to really find myself and be comfortable in my own skin as I walk through this valley of the shadow of civilians. So the mindset is, Year of the Vet is a platform for you to come and listen to other people's stories about how they've successfully transitioned to where they are today. And so that's why I'm excited to bring you this next guest, Eric DeVries. He is an author, a peak performance coach, a vet advocate, and an Air Force veteran. And he and I met through a email server asking questions about mental performance. And so if you've followed this podcast, then you know that I'm in my master's program studying sports psychology, and that's how we met. Eric is part of the war generation. His father was a Vietnam vet. His grandpa fought in World War II, and he can trace family all the way back to both sides of the Revolutionary War. But he didn't join the military immediately after high school. He actually worked at Disneyland until he was 21, where he felt that he was mature enough before enlisting because he wanted to, quote, be willing to give my life away instead of irrationally following directions. And those of us who served from 17, 18 understand that as an adult now. So after his first term as a helicopter mechanic, he moved into computer programming, and then the Air Force forced him into Intel to finish his time in the service. And he talks about the rigidness of the system, saying that, if he had more of an option to go where he wanted to instead of where Uncle Sam needed him, then he would have made different decisions that would have altered his outside. In 2012, he found himself similar to a lot of us, and that's looking around and not recognizing the military that you joined at 17, 18, in his case 21. And he knew he didn't want to stay in for 20 years, and so he started thinking about what jobs were out in the civilian world that he can translate his trade to. But he'll talk about how he started fundraising for those individuals with PTSD, and that was essentially his calling, which led him to Apex to work in sports psychology, mental training, concentration, focus, guided imagery. He had his hands in CSF2, Comprehension Soldier Family Fitness Program. We talked about so many things, from tips on lat moving, talking yourself out of sickness, mind over matter, active listening. We talk about not needing to fix people's problems. Sometimes we just need somebody to show some empathy or sympathy and be there, because sometimes we can internalize a problem for days, weeks, and years, but as soon as those words hit the air, as soon as we verbalize them, sometimes we fix our own problems. So he talks about wearing the fix-it hats, and he mentions some scholarships, one primarily Warriors on Course, post-battle buddy club scholarship funds. He talks about peer support groups and how to start your own peer support group. I don't want to forget that we talked about his book, Control It, Influence It, or Dump That Shit, with its S***IT. And he's in process of writing 3 books in that series. The first book, Control It, Influence It, or Dump That Shit, is about the things that you control, the things that you can influence, and how you can respond to the inevitable that will happen. And the mindset is that your influences have influences on other people. So he talks about it using a hypothetical meteor that's going to take out the world, and what would you do? So the second book talks about military transition, moving from a flexible machine to a different type of chaos. And the third book is focused on the spouses. To wrap it up, we talk about the process of writing book. We talk about reverse engineering problems, whether it be in the IT field or or mental issues that individuals are going through. And he talks about asking the question, who do I want to be and what goals do I have? It's a great conversation because Eric just, he's open and he's honest, and the guidance that he gives it's grade A knowledge. And so I hope that as you listen to Eric, talk about his experience on transition, that a lot of it resonates with you, and maybe you can pull something that is going to help your transition process, or maybe you know somebody that can use some of the information that was shared today. So Eric can be found on social media. It's Eric's Positivity. That's ERICS Positivity. He's on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn with that handle. Or you can email him at ericspositivity@gmail.com. All the show notes will be attached to the show, so you don't have to guess how to spell positivity. But as for You're the Vet, You're the Vet's on iTunes now. It's on multiple podcast platforms, so look for it. You can go to you'rethevet.com, but most importantly, leave a message, subscribe, and share. It does wonders, and there's people out there who really are just looking for the knowledge that's being shared through all these individual stories. And so it's not just my story, my mouth being run for an hour a week, blah, blah, blah. It's other guests who want to come on and share their stories, so you don't have to suffer out there, or you don't have to go looking for answers to questions that you don't even know to ask yet. So let me just wrap it up and move right into the conversation with Eric. Eric, it's an honor to have you on You're the Vet with me today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Robert.
I'm glad that you came on, because how we met, or how we got in contact, is kind of on a whim. We're both a part of a listserv that deals with peak performance, mental training,
right,
kinesiology. So right off the bat, we have that in common. And then I tried to help you find somebody for a project that you're working on, and then we got into more talk. So with that being said, I'm interested in this conversation that's about to come up, because we both have this technical side to the military and the transition out. And then we move into the peak performance side almost simultaneously in time.
Right, within the same time period of after we transitioned, how long it took.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm curious on so many levels of conversation. So before we even get to that point and what you're doing today, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background before joining the military?
Okay. Well, so I'm in the war generation, as some people term it, because my dad was in Vietnam, my grandpa was in World War II, great grandparents was in World War I. I've been able to trace my family tree all the way back to the Revolutionary War. Actually had ancestors that fought on both sides, the British and the Americans.
That's great.
But they didn't realize that they were fighting against each other. I've found one distant relative, not direct bloodline, that actually fought in the Civil War, but for the most part, my direct line, they kind of skipped out of that and moved to Nebraska during the Civil War. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. So aside from that, I mean, I wouldn't say it was my destiny, but my lineage, we've got that character trait of wanting to serve our fellow man, wanting to do something bigger and better than ourselves, and be a part of something, and not just have a job, or just have a career or something, but serve. And now, when I graduated high school, I wasn't quite ready. I was a little bit of a hothead, and I knew if I would have gotten in the military, I probably would have done something stupid and ended up, getting killed or something in battle. And I mean, sure enough, right after I graduated, the Gulf War, Desert Storm, and everything kicked off, and I was like, I knew it. I knew something was going to happen, and so it did. I ended up waiting a couple of years, grew up a little bit, matured, and was ready then finally to sign up with Uncle Sam.
At what age?
I was 21.
Okay, So you feel that at
And
21 you were more mature and the mindset was different?
yeah, the mindset was different. I was willing to, give my life for my country if necessary, but I knew I wasn't going to do something and have that life given just by some stupid act. It would be, in the line of duty as opposed to just some accident or me charging into things, before thinking about it. I had a level head, and I knew I could think things through and make sure that what I was doing was right and not just what I thought I was supposed to do.
What happened between 18 and 21 where you're like, okay, I feel I'm mature enough? Because had you gone in the military at 18, you'd still be kind of, I mean, I know we grow up in the military, but you'd still be what they call in Okinawa a barracks rat, a Bible thumper, or alcoholic. So at 21, so you went
Yeah, well, I don't know if I would have ended up being any of those. I don't know. It would have been a different person entirely. But believe it or not, I actually worked at Disneyland for the 3 years in between high school and joining the military.
Nice.
And I'd actually applied to be an air traffic controller at the point that I was looking for something other than working for the giant mouse, as they say.
Yeah.
And that process took a long time. They had a hiring freeze actually, and after a year of that, I was like, no, forget it. I guess it's time for me to just join the military, and I'll try to be an air traffic controller that way. And
yeah.
I don't know if my physical actually was accurate or if they were just feeding me a line of bull, but they said my depth perception wasn't perfect enough, and so I couldn't be an air traffic controller. So I ended up actually going in as a helicopter mechanic into the Air Force, and that was a great job. I deployed a couple times to Kuwait, saw a few different things, met a lot of good people. Didn't hate the job, but I knew it wasn't something that I wanted to do for 20 plus years. And, even in my mid 20s there, I was like, what am I going to do then? Even if I stay in and do this for 20 years, am I going to get out and work for a news station with their helicopters or a police station or something else, Coast Guard or whatever? I didn't see my life going that direction.
Yeah. And then you did that for how long?
I did that for 3 years. Yeah. In the Air Force, whether you sign up for 4 years or 5 or 6 or whatever, they give you an opportunity a year before your first enlistment is up to cross train.
Yeah.
And of course they're going to try to, force you into critically manned fields where they need a lot of people or something that might be similar to what you were already doing. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, at the 3-year point, I said, well, you either need to retrain me into something computer related, because that always interested me, or at my 4 years, I'm just going to get out and I'll go try to do it on my own, and I'll go back to college and use my GI Bill and, live happily ever after.
Yeah.
But at that 3-year point, they said, okay, we'll let you retrain. And so I actually got into computer programming.
Did you know about computer programming before you opted to lat move?
I knew some. The junior high school and the high school that I went to, we dabbled with it a little bit.
Yeah.
So I knew I had an interest and an aptitude for it, and then especially after just my initial tech school, which was 3 or 4 months or something, I was like, oh yeah, I made the right decision here.
So for anybody who's going through that mindset, that process right now of transitioning into a different MOS or a different job skill, do you have some pointers? Because I never had that opportunity. I stayed in the same field for 10 years, but I know a lot of people who sat there and went through the list looking for, well, does this sound good? Does this sound good? Not knowing anything about any of the other MOSs. What would you do different if you had the opportunity?
At the retraining part or at the initial entry into service?
Looking for the lat move, looking for the next job.
Well, actually, with at least the Air Force process, they ask you to pick your top 3 or 4.
Okay.
And so I had actually put in for programming, also as a computer operator, and then I think maybe like a network administrator or something. I'd put in, 3 or 4 different things, and I'd gotten my top choice. And they give you a basic description of what the career field's supposed to do. And back then, I mean, Google wasn't popular, so there wasn't as much internet searching around in the mid 90s. But I read the descriptions.
Okay.
I don't think that there was any critically manned where they tried to force me into or anything. Maybe programming at that point was one of them where they were understaffed. So that's one thing to really look at is if I don't get my top choice, is the military going to force me into something that I'm not going to like just because they're undermanned in that MOS or their AFSC or whatever.
Okay.
And so it could be to your advantage to look at those that are undermanned and say, out of these, I like this one the best because they're going to try to filter me into something that they want anyway. And so if it matches their need and my need, then that's more to my advantage.
Yeah.
Rather than only going with your own interests, realizing that the military machine is what it is, and it's going to try to make you do what it wants.
Okay.
So you try to make a compromise based on what your needs are, and then also realizing that if they don't approve you or if they try to offer you something else instead, you really got to go with what's going to be comfortable for you and what makes you happy, in the short and the long term.
So how long did you stay in the software life?
Software life was about 11 and a half, 12 years, somewhere in there. And then at that point, the Air Force had decided that they didn't want active duty programmers anymore. And so they were retraining them into other career fields. So I ended up getting into Intel instead. And then before I separated, it was only like 2 or 3 years. And then the Air Force, in its great wisdom, was like, oh, maybe we do need active duty programmers. And so they created a new career field that was more cyber warfare and all this other stuff. And, sometimes I wish that I wouldn't have been forced to retrain. I might still be in the military right now if I'd been able to actually stay IT.
Oh, you got that. I wish I could be in right now itch.
Well, no, I don't have the itch of wanting to get back in. It just makes you consider the fact that if you'd been for me, if I'd been more in control of my own destiny, as opposed to having to, do what Uncle Sam said, there would have been different opportunities and different options available for me. And therefore I would have made different decisions. Whereas at my 20-year point, I was done with the Intel world, and I was like, get me out. And I actually got back into the IT field when I got out.
Well, okay. So 20's coming along, and at this point you're transitioning because that's what's normal. You served your 20, you're ready to get out. At what point do you start thinking about your transition?
More than a year out. And I did that each time that I was going to re-enlist, because you can't just say, okay, my end of service is coming up in a month, so I need to start planning for what I'm going to start doing next month. It's too big of a transition. There's too many things to do. And a decision like that is life changing. And you really have to slow roll your mental transition from one thing to another. Mm-hmm. Obviously, just in my short story here, I've gone through a lot of different things, and I have been in constant transition from one thing to another. And so it was a little bit different and easier for me. But, like I said, each time I was reenlisting, about a year out, I was like, am I going to reenlist? Is the military still serving me the way that I would like? Am I still able to make the contributions that I want to do and make the difference that I think is necessary? Mm-hmm. Or is it time for me to move on to something else where it's, I'm a better match for skills that I can provide elsewhere?
Okay.
And so, yeah, the retirement, it just felt like it was the right time to move on. In early 2012, I'd really been doing some soul searching, and it just wasn't the same military that I had signed up for originally.
Mm-hmm.
And especially because I was working in a field that I had never imagined being in. Some buddies and we ended up wanting to do a fundraiser for an event, and we needed to, try to come up with a cause to raise money for, and started researching into PTSD. And at that point in 2012, the numbers of the average number of suicides each day for veterans was 18 a day, and one on active duty. That number stayed pretty much the same. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's 18 every day that are, ending their life because they, haven't been able to find a purpose, or like anyone cares, or that anyone understands them. And, it just felt like that was a calling for me, that I needed to get out and help make a difference in that, arena.
Now, why are you attached to something close to PTSD that you felt that it was a calling?
Well, just in my day-to-day life, I had friends that they'd consider suicide, and I had talked them out of it, just with my peer mentoring, basically, without having been trained.
Yeah.
I was in charge of a suicide prevention program, but that was death by PowerPoint. It really wasn't, by the regulations, it wasn't designed the way that it should be. And I don't know if things have changed. I hope they have.
Yeah.
But, although they had posters and they had movies and just different things, it really wasn't, a suicide prevention program. It was a suicide education program. And sure, by educating and making people aware of things, it makes a difference. But that is what it is. And I just felt like with my compassion and empathy and my instincts on PTSD and people's feelings for reason for recognition or purpose or whatever, that I could end up getting out and work on getting a degree and getting the education in order to make sure to make a difference. And with my background as a veteran, being able to relate to other veterans definitely is it's a smaller portion of the career field than you would imagine. I don't know what the actual number is, but I mean, only 1% of the population has ever served on active duty.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a very small percentage of counselors and therapists and stuff out there that have been on active duty as well.
Okay.
So I just felt like it was just something that it was another way that I could, rather than serving my country, I could serve my fellow man.
So had you always been interested in psychology?
Somewhat, yeah. I'd never really studied it a lot. I mean, I think I've always been a philosopher and a student of people and trying to understand people's motivation and how things work. I'd taken a psychology class, but that was about it. So my jumping into getting my master's degree in performance psychology, after my bachelor's had been in computer information systems, it was a shift, but it wasn't difficult for me.
Yeah. So, okay, to get back to this point, we grew up in a military-friendly household. You did not decide to go to the military right after high school. You went to work at Disneyland, where my wife is going to be taking my son tomorrow. So, then you joined at 21 into the Air Force, where you were a helicopter mechanic for the first 3 years, and then moved into IT for the next 14 years, right?
Right.
Before Intel. And then you decided, okay, it's time to get out. You started looking about a year at your options. What were your options before getting out?
Well, I knew I couldn't just simply jump into some counseling position or something, because anything anything entry level wouldn't have been able to pay the bills. And I knew that I wanted to get my master's degree.
Okay.
My options kind of were going back into the IT field because it would pay the bills.
Gotcha.
It would be something that I had already been familiar with, something that I was educated and capable of doing, and I had connections, and that's the most important part. Anybody that doesn't have a LinkedIn account, I don't care whether you've only been in the military for a year, or if you've been in for 25 years or whatever, or if you're not going to get out for years down the line, that social networking, website is a vital tool to be able to help you network with other individuals. Anybody that you've worked with that can vouch for what you've done, or that can give support in you being able to find, your next bigger thing. They say a lot of times, it's not what you know, but who you know, and that's extremely true. But it's a mixture of what you know and who you know.
Yeah.
Because when I made an announcement out to my friends on social media, on Facebook as well as LinkedIn, I said, hey, we're coming back to San Antonio. Anybody know of a good IT job out there? Companies that are hiring or whatever. And within a couple of days, I had my resume in front of a hiring agent, and I was getting interviewed, and it happened really, really quickly, and obviously a lot faster than it would have if I was just trying to apply to things only on my own.
Oh, yeah.
And I did hear back on some applications that I had submitted through, directly to other companies and stuff, but because I knew someone that could vouch for me, that finding a new job happened like amazingly fast. I was very surprised.
It's funny because LinkedIn right now is it's been on the very top of my mind, because I wrote in my book about LinkedIn, the power of LinkedIn, because I was hired off of LinkedIn similarly on using LinkedIn. So I appreciate that you're bringing that up, because it's very important. It's very, very super important. In fact, so much so that yesterday I was writing to individuals that I'd worked with, other managers that I don't work with currently, asking them for referrals or references, right? So it could be an online reference, so you're not carrying around letters of recommendation in your resume folder. So yeah, LinkedIn is super important. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, and the recommendations is also extremely important, because for those that don't know, I mean, yeah, sure, a job might end up asking you for references, and they might call them and they might not. But if you're getting, let's say you've been in the military for 11 years, and you know that you're going to be spending 20 years in and retiring, but you're PCSing to a new job, and you have on your LinkedIn account what you've done at your current job. And your duty officer, or maybe your senior NCOIC or whatever, they are like, hey, if there's anything I can do for you, in the future, let me know, because you were a good egg, as they say, or we're really going to miss you or whatever. And you're like, hey, can you make a recommendation for me on LinkedIn? And so they can actually go in there at your 11-year point in the military and put a recommendation based on that job, and say, yeah, this person was, instrumental in us being able to, make successful strides towards whatever.
Correct.
And so they've done it right then and there, while it's still fresh on their mind, why they would say that they would recommend you for any job, why they would say that they would trust you with their dogs and their kids and everything else.
Yeah.
And then 9 years down the line, when you're actually going to retire, you don't have to reach back out to them and say, hey, remember when we worked together?
Exactly.
Can you put something in for me? Because I'm really going to need it now that I'm transitioning out and I'm going to need to get a job.
Exactly.
It's already there. Potential employers and recruiters don't have to ask for your references because they already see that another person has actually put it out there publicly as a recommendation.
Correct. And I'll even take it a step further. If you're in college right now, especially in your master's program, and you're in a course that's challenging or that you're taking to benefit your life, benefit your profession outside, you can tap into those instructors, those professors, or your grad advisor, something like that, and they can do the same thing to take it one step further. So,
right.
Okay, so you got out, you went to work in a field that wasn't extremely exciting for you. You knew the intel and you knew the programming world. It was similar to something you knew while you were in. It pays well. And so you did that. You got out and you worked into that field for 3 years. Is that right?
Yeah, about 3 years. Yeah.
Because then you moved to Apex. So what is Apex?
So Apex Performance is a small business. It's a service-disabled veteran-owned small business that basically teaches mental resilience and peak performance to individuals.
Why is mental performance and peak performance and resiliency important?
Why are they important?
Yeah. Well, I know why.
Well,
but for conversation purposes.
Yeah, I was just making sure I heard you right.
Oh, okay.
So I'll put it to you this way. So performance psychology is like an umbrella term that's over anything that you are going to accomplish. A lot of people have heard of sports psychology. So Michael Jordan, when he was playing basketball and he was winning all those championship rings, he had his basketball coach, but then he also had a performance coach. He had a mental performance coach.
George Mumford.
That would, basically coach him on the things that he needed to do for concentration and focus and, guided imagery and all this other stuff that, and it was all psychology stuff. But I don't think anyone would think that Michael Jordan was crazy or needed to see a shrink. But seeing someone that's a psychology specialist that is able to help you focus on the task at hand, filter out the things that aren't important to focus on at that point in time, so that you can perform to the best of your ability, both physically and mentally. It's definitely something that people need without having to feel like they're getting analyzed or that they're trying to be told how to fix problems or be labeled with something like PTSD or some disorder.
Yeah.
They just need to be able to figure out how to use their brain better. Just like going to a physical trainer to be able to figure out how to bench press more or how to run faster or do other physical things. We're not all psychology experts. We can't all just know how to think better.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you took that model of thought and created Apex? Was Apex a thing?
No, Apex Performance was already a company.
Okay.
Owned by Dr. Louis Choka, who he actually started a program at West Point back in the 80s, where they were dealing with sports psychology mainly with the football team, and they were using biofeedback in order to show how just changing the way that they breathe, changing the way that they think about certain things actually change their heart rate and their muscle tension and all sorts of other things. And eventually he ended up having it be the Army Center for Enhanced Performance that eventually became what's now known as CSF2, which is the Comprehensive soldier and family fitness program, where it's not as much of the biofeedback aspect, but it's more of the, still mental resilience and everything. So the program got a little diluted when the Army took it away from Dr. Choka, but he didn't let that hold him back. He started his own company. He's been consulting with professional athletes, with some NFL teams, some NASCAR drivers, some professional golfers, and other individuals who just want to be able to think better and perform better.
Okay. So how did you get involved, and what was your role there?
Yeah. So after he had created Apex Performance, after a couple of years, the Wound Wear Project got with him, and they said, "Hey, we remember your program from when it was at West Point. We think that this would be a great program for veterans to be able to go through, whether they have PTSD or not. They're just maybe having problems transitioning to a civilian mindset. Do you think we can create a program for veterans?" Mm-hmm. And he was like, "Yeah, obviously we can." So Wound Wear Project created the track program, which was exactly that. It was a transitional program. It was, veterans who had already tried to transition out of the military and into a civilian lifestyle, but had failed. They had tried to go back to school. They had tried to go back to work. And for whatever reason, they just weren't able to feel like they belonged or like they could actually do what was required of them. Mm-hmm. And so they just kind of quit. And so Wound Wear Project was able to recruit those individuals, say, "Hey, give us a year and we'll teach you these mental skills, and we will get you successfully through 2 semesters of college and an 8-week externship program with a company who was willing to hire you." It was basically exactly what I was trying to do myself, whether I was doing it on my own or whether I was working for a company. Something that was non-clinical, something that didn't try to diagnose anybody, didn't care about their childhood, didn't mm-hmm. care if they had mommy or daddy issues, mm-hmm. Didn't really want to focus on what trauma an individual had gone through, whether it was combat related, whether it was sexual assault, whatever. It's just a matter of, what do you want to do? What goals can we set for you? How can we walk you through that process of you feeling like you actually matter to yourself and to other people, and try to do so without medication.
Yeah.
And so that was how I applied for the job and getting it.
Well, how did you get that job with your background being in something completely unrelated?
Well, because of the degree program that I went through.
Okay.
Because by that point I had already finished my graduate degree. And this goes back to, who you know.
Yeah.
They really knew my lead professor at National University.
Gotcha.
And so she vouched for me also.
Gotcha. But
they had said that we did a Skype interview, and they had said that in the first 10 minutes that I'd been talking with them that I already had the job. And we still had like an hour-long interview.
Yeah.
But they knew that I got the process, and that as a veteran that I would be able to, identify with the clients,
correct,
with the students, and that with the education I had already gone through, and especially with the specialty of it, that I would be able to do a bang out job, and I did.
Yeah.
So, if you're wanting to find a job that, deals with veterans, then regardless of whether it's an IT field or whether it's psychology or whether it's, out in the oil fields or whatever, either you're working with other veterans, for other veterans, or maybe the company itself is veteran focused, use that as a keyword when you're on the job boards. even if it's software development, saying software development, and then put in the word veteran. And if that's on the page somewhere for the job listings, it'll come up, and it could end up helping you filter down to, a handful of possible jobs as opposed to a couple hundred.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you talked about biofeedback earlier, and I wanted to ask you, let's talk about biofeedback as a leveraging intervention technique for performance psychology, because a little background about me is that I studied hypnotherapy for a year, and my bachelor's is in psych. And so when I approach psychology, it's from a more scientific mindset. And so when I was studying hypnotherapy, I'd say 4 to 5 months in, I really didn't buy into it until we had a biofeedback class. And I could see on the screen that this person's going from alpha and beta waves into theta and delta, and that they were doing it was a 15-minute counseling. And I guess the guy was talking about his dad, and there was just this seemingly flat line. And the minute he hit this trigger word during the counseling portion, you could see that trigger instantly kick up into, I don't know, decibels. And so that was my buy-in. In fact, my buy-in is how it's the reason I'm writing the thesis that I'm writing right now. The buy-in. What's your buy-in? And so biofeedback was my buy-in. Can you talk about biofeedback as a leveraging intervention?
Yeah, well, I mean, I hadn't even really touched on it much before I even actually got the job. When I found out about the opening, and I started looking at it, I did a lot of Googling, and I tried to figure out what it was, and then when they told me that my Skype interview was going to be giving them a presentation on what they did, I was like, oh my goodness, I really need to learn about this. Yeah. And so I did. I took the whole weekend, and I was just absorbing myself in what the heck is biofeedback. And I mean, realistically, you think about it. Well, so biofeedback in a nutshell is any time that you have a sensor physically, on your external body that senses your heart rate, your respiration, your muscle tension, body temperature, and skin conductance which is sweat glands. I mean, that's all biofeedback. Anytime that you go to the doctors and they check your pulse, that's biofeedback. Yeah. Whether it's someone's hand just sensing it, or whether it's actually quantified through equipment, over a duration of time, it's still biofeedback. Yeah. And so if you think about it, we all started from a single cell. Sure, there was two parts that met with the sperm and the egg, but it developed one cell, and that cell divided, and then those divided and divided and divided, and eventually we have all these millions and trillions of cells that all really are the same cell, but they just have different DNA activated in order to tell it whether it's a skin cell or whether it's a heart cell or a toe or a piece of hair or whatever. But they're all from the same source. And so we as individuals are all just connected entirely, and our brain is part of that, and our brain can control every piece of us. I don't get sick. The flu might come around and everything, but I don't have time to be sick, and so I don't let myself get sick. It sounds strange. No, but, it doesn't. I'll start sneezing or something, and I'm just like, nope, this can't take me down. Yeah. And so I don't let it. I physically, mentally tell myself, you're not going to be sneezing so much that you can't function. And I might take an Advil or something for hay fever or something, but mind over matter is not a myth. It's an actual thing, and our conscious brain can only think of one thing at a time, but our subconscious can think of a lot of things all at the same time. And that's where the hypnotherapy that you went through the education for that really deals with is the subconscious, because that's what's actually making everything function, whether we're realizing it or not.
Correct.
As we drive out on the freeways, how many times have we been focused on something and then we missed our exit because we're actually going somewhere different than where we normally go, but we're on the same path that we usually maybe commute to work, and so we're kind of on autopilot and just hoping that our subconscious is a good driver, because that's what's driving us at that point, because our conscious brain is thinking of something else.
Correct.
And so going back to the biofeedback aspect, we've been able to show that the heart and lungs need to work in conjunction with each other, and showing the numbers as far as how fast someone is breathing versus how fast their heart is beating. And then when they start thinking of something else, or whether they change the way that they're breathing, it actually changes the way that their heart is beating and how tense their muscles are, and, all these other things that go on that our subconscious just kind of takes control of. And it's all based on instincts, whether it's the fight or flight instinct, or whether it's just, our feelings in a certain situation that we feel like we've been in before.
Now, I have a question, and it just popped up, but since you were working at Apex, did you find it, I guess, difficult to have veterans buy in? And the reason I'm asking is because I'm seeing a lot of alphas, right? If you have an alpha mentality, or if you're from an area that's not really technologically advanced, or even like spiritually advanced, or I find it very hard to have those individuals buy in. And that's why, again, back to my thesis, the buy-in, right? Did you have a hard time getting people to believe you when you were saying, look, all you have to do is, and we say all you have to do, right? But you say, hey, look, try this out. When you start noticing that you're becoming anxious, take a few deep breaths, right?
Well,
how did you get guys to buy into your mind is more powerful than your body?
So in the program that we taught, there was a whole week-long presentation, a whole week-long workshop on the brain and our instincts, and just talking through, how things function and why things function.
Okay.
And the fact that our coaching was not going to be dealing with therapy. We weren't going to be having to lay down on a couch and talk about their childhood or anything, but that it was just really about, performance itself.
Gotcha.
And goal setting, and why making goals ends up working, and having testimonials, recorded videos about the use of guided imagery and meditation and all these other things. And so over the course of a week, there was a little bit of a buy-in, but then with games that are hooked up to the biofeedback sensors that respond to the individual's thoughts and breathing patterns and stuff, the game changes in more difficulty or easier difficulty based on that. Then they could actually physically see, oh my gosh,
Gotcha.
Because I was holding my breath and my heart rate changed, that made the game function differently.
Gotcha.
And that's exactly what happens in real life when I'm driving, or whether I'm having an argument with my significant other or whatever else. And we were able to relate those things to real world situations.
Yeah. Okay. That's okay. So at this same time, you were you used a process called psychological first aid, right? And that uses the rapid model.
Yeah.
Can you explain the rapid model, and can anyone use it in their day-to-day lives?
Well, I would say anybody can, but you just, so the problem with at least Americans, I can't say with everybody around the world, but we've got so much stuff that bombards us, whether it's in the real world or whether it's on social media or whatever, that we unfortunately spend more time listening to other people in order for us to be able to respond to them than we do trying to listen in order to understand. And when it really comes down to it, that's what we have to do, especially in the situation where somebody is going through trauma, or when they're feeling extremely down or not worthwhile or whatever. That if we just simply listen and tell them that we care and that we mirror back what they're communicating through active listening, and they understand that we understand, it makes a big difference. In John Gray's book about Mars and Venus with men and women, he ends up pointing out that the best chapter that I read in that book was the fact that, men, they have a Mr. Fix-It hat on, and they just want, when they have a problem, they just want to fix it. Whereas women just simply want to be heard and understood, and they feel like they can get through the problem themselves. So I've learned out of my own relationships that, when my wife comes to me with a problem or when she's feeling down about something, I don't need to fix it.
Yeah.
I can just simply say, oh yeah, that sounds like it really sucks, or I can understand that that's the way that you're feeling.
Yeah.
And you don't have to like try to tell them that they need to stop feeling that way or that they need to do this in order to, fix the problem, because that's not why they're coming to you. The same thing with anybody that's coming and saying, I'm feeling really down. I don't feel like I'm worthwhile. If you ask them why, and if they then explain what's making them feel that way, and you're like, well, yeah, that makes sense. That I would feel that way too if I'd gone through everything that you've gone through. And then you ask them, so what do we think that we can do about it? Is there any way I can help you? Rather than just simply offering advice first, if unsolicited.
Yeah.
Because
which I do often.
By the time, which is an instinct of us, is just trying to give that advice.
Yeah.
If instead we say, well, what have you thought about this? Have you thought of any solutions? And then, heck, you might even realize that they've already thought about the advice that you were going to offer.
Yeah.
But the brain's a funny thing, and it tries to work through solutions itself. And now I've lost my train of thought of where I was going with that. But, the issue for communication, we can think about a problem ourselves, like for days or weeks or months or something, and we've only internalized it. But as soon as we have to communicate it in a way that someone else will understand it, as soon as those words hit the air and have oxygen added to it, where someone else is going to need to make a decision or have an interpretation or be able to understand it, your brain trying to communicate it and organize it in such a way that it can be communicated, all of a sudden, sometimes that's when we have an epiphany ourselves, and we're like, oh, wow, I didn't think about it that way, or it didn't click for me until just now that this is what I need to do. Yeah. And so that's why a lot of times just having someone to bounce an idea off of is all that we really need to do. Yeah. So with that psychological first aid that you mentioned, just having someone that listens and cares and empathizes and then can remind you, well, you do have family that supports you. You do have money in the bank. You have a roof over your head. You do have all these resources that are at your facility or at your fingertips. I'm sure you're going to be able to figure this out. If there is anything that we can do, let us know. It's not going to help everybody in every situation, but a lot of times it's enough where someone can start getting a little self-confidence back.
Yeah. And so rapid breaking down into reflective listening, assessment, prioritization, intervention and disposition. But yes, I mean, that's all, you know what, even as a counselor myself, I find myself having to do a lot of stopping, right? I have to stop what I'm about to say. And I'm 34 going on 35, and it's been a 35-year journey of me not interrupting you with my thoughts. But in this last year, or especially since, the hypnotherapy course, I've been more, I've acknowledged it more. So I'm trying, but you're right. In the sense that we wear this fix-it hat, and I got into this field because that was what I was doing for years and years and years. I was helping people. I was listening to them and helping them through their problems. But as you get older, like you were saying, you realize that people can help themselves through their problems. They just want you to be there to listen. Don't fix everything. I hear that all the time. Yeah. I don't need you to fix me. Just listen.
Well, and no matter, how much education, even if I ended up going and getting my PhD and all sorts of certifications and all this other stuff and had been able to help hundreds or thousands of people, I will never be able to help my wife through a problem the same way that I can help a stranger. Because and that's not anything against my wife or against me.
I get it.
There's an old saying: a prophet is not accepted in his own village.
Okay.
And the thing is that when people know you personally, and when you know them personally, and especially in an intimate relationship with a family member or a spouse, your words are received differently, and they're even delivered differently because you have a vested interest in them resolving a problem or getting through a situation or just simply feeling better and not feeling sad.
Yeah.
And you having that personal connection is completely different from them going to, a trained therapist. Even if you'd been through the exact same education as someone else, that person's training and ability to empathize from a distance is a lot different than you as the same trained individual as the spouse.
Yeah, we call it in hypnotherapy, we call it one-upsmanship, right? So they tell you, you could practice on your spouse, your significant other, but you can never go through a full hypnotherapy session with them because there's no one-upsmanship, right? So when somebody comes into your office and you have a suit and tie on, they automatically believe that you are the resident expert, whereas your people, right, the people who see you every day, they're like, man, you were just, you were just streaking down the street last week, and you're trying to tell me how to, perform mentally. Yeah, no, we call it one-upsmanship, and it absolutely is a thing, and that's why we have rank on our collars, because when people walk up to us, they feel that we're an expert because we have the rank. And so it's all over the world. But yeah, I understand that. That's interesting. I have a few more things to hit on. Do you still have a little bit of time? Okay. One of the things that interested me was you were a chairman for Warriors on Course, and some of your roles were to promote awareness on PTSD, which you've been doing for a few years, refer individuals to support services like family retreats, get service animals for individuals, counseling, equestrian programs I saw. But you also started a post-battle buddy club for veterans to have a peer group for support, as well as start a scholarship fund for veterans who were looking to pursue their master's and their doctorates in psychology, counseling, and social work. And so do you think that you could break down the programs that you provided, but specifically the peer group and the scholarships? And if anybody is looking to do something similar, can you point them in the right direction?
Right. Well, with the peer groups, I mean, the VA, a lot of the VA hospitals will have a peer group, so that it's like, you and me just, talking about whatever, instead of going to see a therapist or a counselor or someone that we feel may judge us. It's going to be a peer that's been through the same stuff or knows somebody who was through the same exact thing as you, and can simply relate. And it's that active listening. It's that that cognitive connection between two peers, and not always having to get together as a group therapy session, but just knowing that there's other individuals who can relate to you makes it so that you can communicate socially in a more positive and productive manner.
Yeah.
And that's how the VFW and American Legion posts first started out. Was they all had a bar. They all had it was a gathering place for veterans to be able to get away from non-veterans who didn't understand and didn't empathize, but they could still sit there and talk about nothing and have it be okay, or they could tell dirty jokes and not have anybody casting an evil eye at them or anything.
Yeah.
So kind of the same thing. Wounded Warrior Project has tried to start up some peer support groups. I think the other major nonprofits, they try to do the same thing. Sometimes they'll go have a certification class or something to make sure that you can do the psychological first aid or whatever term that they try to do. Chances are that if there's a community of veterans that lives in an area, there either is a peer support group or that there's a desire to have one. And even if it needs to be virtual, where you start your own Facebook group so that people can share pictures and memes and stories and stuff together, it's still one way to be able to connect with other individuals.
Okay.
So that was kind of the motivation behind that. And I mean, the one that I started was out in Virginia, and I ended up having to leave less than a year after I had started it. So I honestly don't even know if it's still up and going. But the same principles will, all you got to do is start getting two people together, and you've got a support group, and you just recruit other folks.
Good.
Here in San Antonio, there's other organizations that are starting up. They're trying to have safe havens for veterans to go to that, because unfortunately there's like a stigma about the VFW and American Legion where it's for the older generation. They don't recognize me. I can't relate to them because they went through a different war.
Yeah.
I didn't have landmines that I went through and all this other stuff. And it wasn't in a swamp, it was in a desert, that type of thing. And so there's other organizations that are starting up, and I'm sure that if you look for them online, you'll be able to find them.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the best way to look for a group, a peer group or a support group online, right?
Yeah. The best way is to look online, and if there's not one existing, I would recommend start a Facebook group. Title it whatever you want to, something veterans and peers and the city that you live in, and then contact one of the other large nonprofits, or contact all of them that are in your area and say, hey, call them and ask them, hey, do you have a peer support group? And if not, why, and would you be interested in starting one? Mm-hmm. There's going to be interest.
Gotcha.
Even if you're the first one to vocalizes it, there's going to be interest, and it may be slow going, but again, even if it's only two people meeting together, at first, it will grow.
Okay. So kind of fast forward to what you're doing today, right? We met because you were asking about some services for the book that you're writing. And that book, is that Control, Influence, and Shit?
Yeah. Actually, that's going to be the first book in a series on stress management.
Okay.
The first one is about the things you can control and the things that you can influence, and then the inevitable that's going to happen no matter what you do. And so, like one of the chapters in my book says, you can't do anything about an asteroid coming to hit the Earth. And so what are your choices at that point? Well, instinctively, you may just want to curl up in a ball and cry and suck your thumb until the asteroid hits the Earth and everybody dies.
Mm-hmm.
But is that a way to live? Is that something that you're going to feel good about? I mean, sure, it's an option, and sure, it's it's viable.
Yeah.
And can you judge anybody for doing that? Well, no, but I wouldn't choose to do that.
Yeah.
So your other choices, because again, you don't have any control or influence over an asteroid, but you do have control and influence over how you respond to it.
Yeah.
So you can dig a bunker and try to get enough, food and water and medical supplies and everything else in this bunker for you and whoever else you think needs to be in there with you, and try to be able to survive the asteroid when it hits.
Yeah.
Or, you can just simply say, well, I don't have the resources or the time to be able to build a bunker, so I'm just going to live my life the best that I possibly can. I'm just going to start knocking stuff off my bucket list and enjoy my life here on Earth while it still remains.
Yeah.
Or just say, hey, I don't have the money. I can't go and do my bucket list. So I'm just going to, do what I can and try to enjoy what I can while I can. And then there's going to be the other people that unfortunately take the negative route, and they're going to say, hey, asteroids hitting the Earth in a year. Even if I get thrown in jail, it's not like it's going to be 20 years or anything. I'm just going to finally knock off everybody that I ever hated, and they have their own list that they want to accomplish. Robbing a bank or whatever they're going to end up doing.
Doesn't that sound
so
fun?
that they can do another bucket list. I mean, those are options. Unfortunately, that's a negative, but it's a reality of how some people would respond to something that they have no control or influence over, and it would be a negative influence on other people.
Yeah.
So then you just weigh your priorities as far as what matters, what doesn't matter, and what's going to make the best use of your time for what your end goal is.
Okay.
So there would be one other thing that some people could possibly try to do, and it's very important, in the fact that maybe you could actually influence NASA or DARPA or some other large organization that has the ability to create laser beams or rockets or something that could end up attacking that asteroid and making it so that it doesn't hit the Earth.
Yeah. So
you don't have the control or the resources, but you might be able to influence the people that do have the control and influence over the resources.
Yeah.
So that is also another option, is to be able to influence the people that do have it.
Well, my option would be to go impregnate as many people as possible, and therefore, if they survive, then I have lineage on the planet. So no,
that's an option. And especially if it's two consenting adults.
No, I didn't say consent at all.
No. Hey,
I'm playing. I'm messing.
Well, again, so it's the control and influence. Whether you want to do it all for good or whether you don't care of negatively influencing someone else.
So it's a 3-part series, you're saying, and this first book, Control, Influence, and Shit, right? That explores the mentality of looking at all your options, thinking outside the box, and then basically whatever's going on externally, even internally, but mostly externally, we don't have control over the external factors. So what is our step to kind of to make it even?
The first book is laying the groundwork for stress management and personal empowerment.
Okay.
Taking charge of and responsibility for what you have in your control and what you're accountable for. And then all that other junk, all the other inevitable shit, let it go. Because it does nothing good for you, and it does nothing good for anyone else.
Yeah.
The past is the past. I'm not saying to forget the past, but there's things that if you can't do anything about what happened, the learning experience that our brain wants us to hold on to from it is, if we're in the same situation, what would we do differently in order to prevent it, or at least minimize the negativity in it?
Correct.
And try to keep, a positive aspect on everything. So this book is just laying the groundwork for all of that. And then the next book will end up being specifically on the military transition mindset that has to go from, thinking like a military machine in a structured world, but flexible world, and then transitioning into a world where people are focused on, personal issues, profits, and other things that are rather chaotic and maybe unpredictable, transitioning into that, way of thinking, or at least understanding that that's how everybody else thinks, so that you can end up making the right influence on how people respond to you and how you respond to them. The third book will end up being more geared towards the military spouses and dependents. Basically, what the hell happened to my veteran? Because the person that they fell in love with or always knew before deployment or before 5 deployments is no longer the person that
Correct.
The person now is no longer the person that I first initially met. And explaining what that mindset is and why they think the way that, or we think the way that we think, and how to leverage that in a positive way, and how to relate to it in a way that's beneficial for everybody. And then after that, there'll be other books, but those are the first 3 that I'm working on currently, kind of all at the same time, but I'm putting more effort, obviously, towards the first one because it lays the groundwork.
So what's the process of writing been like for you?
Well, first you got to come up with an idea, and then you have to make the commitment to yourself that you're just going to do it.
Yeah.
Setting a timeline can help. But basically just making the commitment that you're going to work towards it and start making that progress is really what helps the entire process.
Yeah.
Because I've been thinking about writing a book for 30 years. I've had story ideas. I've had ideas of what content might be good in a book and all this other stuff. But it wasn't just until the past few months that I was like, you know what, I got to stop talking about it, and I just got to do it. And so what does it take to do that? Well, getting a publisher, or at least learning how to self-publish. And so at that point, getting a publisher is getting yourself. But then at that point, you've got to then educate yourself. So it's a matter of time and money. What resources then do you have within your control and influence to be able to have a successful publisher, whether that's someone else or it's you? And then really, from that point, because it's a self-improvement book as opposed to a novel, the process is a little different, but you basically got to come up with an outline and then supporting points within the major chapters, and then it kind of just writes itself after that.
Gotcha.
And in order to make it so that I'm not just spouting off words on my own and it just comes across as my opinion, and yet not come across as an academic book where there's all sorts of, $20 words and well, this research study from this place proved that this because of the quantitative, you're already bored listening to that. So I've been interviewing people in order to say, well, this individual from X company or, Y organization, they say that when somebody is in this situation, that this is a resource that could help. And just mentioning it kind of off the cuff, but using the interview as a way to get quotes and to show that there are other, resources out there for people to utilize,
Correct.
And that this is a common thought process for people to use to solve problems and to manage stress. It's also able to reach a larger audience and make sure that people can relate to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because and this is the last tailored question, but since you have this extensive background on the psych side, and then, back in the day you had the extensive lifestyle of coding and programming and XYZ, can you find similarities when it comes to reverse engineering a finished product to find the issue? I know that you weren't doing traditional counseling with these individuals, but I know that things came up that go backwards, right? So can you talk about reverse engineering in the mind and well, you know what? I'll cut that out. Don't worry about it. So
well, I mean, I can touch on it if you want.
No, it's fine. It's because I don't know. Do you want to? It's up to you.
Well, we can always talk about it, and then you can cut it out later if you decide to.
Well, I won't cut it out if we talk about it, but
well, so when it comes to reverse engineering, whether it's on a computer or whether it's on a brain, it's all about things being linked to other things. And, for me, it's just problem solving. And again, whether it's the computer or the brain or grocery shopping or whatever the case is, you look at the situation at hand and you say, well, this is the current state. And maybe it's important to understand where that state came from, and maybe it's not. If you're actually looking at reverse engineering, then yeah, you do need to study it. You do need to figure out what is making this thing tick. Why does somebody have survivor's remorse? They were inside of a building and their buddy was outside and something happened to that buddy. And the person feels, well, I should have been out there. And if I had been, things would have been different. Things would have, I might have been able to save their life or kept them from losing a limb or whatever it is. And sure, all that's true. And you can accept all that as a reality of the fact that, things would have been different if I would have done something different. And that's forgive the pun, but that's a no-brainer. Obviously, if you do things different, things are going to result different.
Correct.
The key is to not be absorbed in what happened in the past, but taking that lesson of, if I would have done something different, something else would have happened, so that you can say, if I'm ever in this situation again, I'm going to pay homage to my battle buddy that, lost a limb or their life, because I didn't act fast enough or I wasn't in the right place. So I'm going to make sure I'm in the right place for the next guy or gal. And so doing that reverse engineering, again, even going back to computers, you figure out what makes something the way that it is, so that way, not so that you can keep it that way, but so that way you can change the future way that it acts and responds to input and output, so that it can have a different result, whether it's better or worse or faster or more efficient or whatever, but so that it can act in a different way in the future for a different output. The same thing is going to go with the brain. You can be sad and be remorseful and I mean, all those feelings are great and valid, but being able to say, hey, because this is the outcome that happened because of this action or lack of action, I pay respect to that individual, and do them honor by doing something different in the future. And that's what you focus on, is making sure that your future actions are going to be different and more improved.
Okay. So kind of wrapping
it up. Is that kind of what you were trying to get for or looking at or
no,
what?
No, it's exactly, I mean, I'm not fishing for the right answer. I'm just trying to understand other people and be able to walk out of this conversation a little more in tune with an eclectic sense of how to approach people, right? So one thing that I notice with some tenured therapists is that there's one way and one way only. And as long as the military, as long as I've been out of the military, as long as, I've just been into psych, I know that is not the answer. So that's why I was kind of tapping into that, but I do appreciate that.
Right. No, there's never one answer. And when it comes to, what I would do in a situation, I can say, look, if I was in that situation, this is what I would do.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say what you should do.
Yeah.
You have different resources and different abilities than I do. I think it would be the best thing for you to do, but you might not think that same way. And who am I to judge you for trying to use your resources in a different way than I use my resources?
Yeah. Yeah. Even with mental practices, you could tell somebody, I listened to Finding Mastery with Michael Gervais, and his process is to tap into individuals who are masters in their field and see what their mental practices are and see if there's kind of a similarity between the individuals. And some people use mental practices, and some people will say, I breathe in the morning. I take gratitude breaths in the morning. And so he'll ask the question, well, how long, right? So he wants to quantify, and he may not be wanting to quantify, but he wants to see if there's a similarity, and there never is. Some people say, I go on a walk and I'll breathe, or I'll do, 17 minutes. Some people will say, I do the first 3 minutes, and then at night. So there's never, for mental practices, for anything that we're talking about, there's no right answer.
Right.
So to wrap it up, what would you tell vets who are struggling to find themselves today?
That's a really good question. So now each individual is different. There, like we just said, there's not just one way to do things. But we all try to define our future purpose by how we got to where we are and who we think that we are right now. And yet we all realize that we change throughout our lives, that, looking at yourself now and how you see the world and how you respond to it is different than the way that you did right before you got in the military and right after you got in the military. That 1 year, the 6 months before and after, in that 1 year you were a completely different person. Mm-hmm. So rather than focusing on what you've always done and how you think that you've always done it and who you simply are, you have to say, who do I want to be? What goals do I have? Do I want to run a marathon? Do I want to program computers? Do I want to get into psychology? Do I just want to volunteer my time for other veterans? Do I want to ride a bicycle around the world, which is on my bucket list, by the way? Well, actually a recumbent tricycle. So what do I want to do? And then what do I need to do in order to reach that goal? And that's what I do in a lot of my counseling and coaching is, I don't care what happened to you as a kid. What do you want to do now? What's going to make you find purpose now? Or what's going to make you find purpose in 5 years? And what do you need to do now in order to get to that point?
Yeah. Because
you can't become the person that you want to be 5 years from now if you don't start acting at some point.
Correct.
And so if you're having a problem identifying with who you are, then just figure out who you want to be. And, the day that I decided I was going to write a book, I started introducing myself as an author.
Beautiful.
My book isn't even published yet, but it will be soon. And I say I'm an author. I'm a motivational speaker. I am a mental coach. Because whether I'm getting paid for it or whether I'm volunteering it or whether I am just doing the things that it takes to be an author, a motivational speaker, whatever. That's what I now am, because that's what I'm working towards.
Yeah.
You know, when you got in the military, and let's say you were in infantry, you know, the first day of basic training, you were a soldier. And when you graduated from basic training, you were still a soldier. When you got to your tech school, or, you know, MOS school, or whatever the Army calls it, you know, for being specialized as an infantryman, that first day, you hadn't even been certified as infantry yet, but you could say, I'm an infantryman. Yeah. You know, so whether you're certified to do something or whether you're working towards it, you know, if that's what you're needing to have as an identity, as finding a purpose, is the fact that you're just simply working towards it, you know, that's what I recommend.
Yeah. I like to say also, yet, right? So, we live in the valley, and I'd like to move back onto the other side of the 405. And my wife will say, well, we don't have the money. And I always throw out yet, right? We don't have it yet. You know, I haven't been XYZ yet. So the changing of the mindset, just like you're saying, changing the mindset, you know, and I've been doing what you're saying in the last year, where I have to catch myself saying, well, I'm training to XYZ, or I'm thinking about, no, you are, right? I am an author. I've written a book. It's out. People have bought it. I'm an author. So, you know, like, I have to embrace that. And that's important. And you're the first person I've talked to that brought that up. So I appreciate that. So, is there any contact information that you'd like to share in case somebody wants to reach out to you?
Well, the best way, it's kind of simple. It's Eric's Positivity, ERICS Positivity. I don't want to spell that out. And you can use that handle on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn. You can find me that way. And then Eric's Positivity at gmail.com until I get my website up and going. That'll be the best way to reach out to me. Whether you want to help provide content for, you know, the books I'm working on, whether you need a little bit of advice, you know, just someone to kind of identify with, or that can, you know, point you to resources. You know, I'm very willing to put myself out there for use for veterans.
Good. And did we touch everything, or are there any other topics that you'd like to speak about?
No, I think that was really everything.
Cool. Well, okay. When can we start looking for the first book?
I'm aiming for late spring, early summer. It may be sooner than that, but that's kind of my personal deadline.
Okay. So we're all going to look for in the late spring, early summer. Control, influence, and can we say shit, or is that just?
Well, hey, it's your podcast. I've censored it on the book title, so it's just ***it. But yeah, it's control it, influence it, or dump that it.
Gotcha.
Your 3 choices for healthy stress management. And it'll be on Amazon. It'll be on the website. You know, all my social media things will end up having information on how to purchase it and all that stuff.
Okay. Then we'll look out for that.
Yeah.
I'll look out for that. I'll definitely buy a copy, and I will provide you with some applause and some feedback and some, you know, congratulations are in need. So, but I appreciate you taking the time out to have this conversation with me. It's been a couple weeks in the making.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, when you have conversations with like-minded people, they tend to go back fast. So when I'm looking at this clock and it says an hour and 32 minutes, it's hard to believe. But I do appreciate it, and I learned a lot from the other side.
Good.
And so I appreciate that. But with that,
no problem. Well, if there's another opportunity where you've got a similar topic, or you want to have multiple guests, or even me as a repeat guest, that's fine. Just, you know, let me know.
Great. So with that being said, Eric, thank you for joining us on You're the Vet. I had a great time. Thank you so much for all the information you brought to us, and in giving us your background. And so there is one last question I'd like to ask before we sign off, and I ask all the guests this. Is there somebody, so just like you came on and you had this story to tell and some information to share for veterans going through the process to help them get back on their feet or even leave the service without having to stumble, is there an individual that has gone through this whole process that you look up to as somebody who is able to give back to this community that would be a good fit for this podcast?
There's someone that's involved with another podcast who may be willing to talk with you. Last name is Kinder. I don't remember what his first name is. He's in charge of the Kinder group. I've got him on my LinkedIn, so I'm trying to talk and stall here while I come up with what his first name is.
I can find him. Anyway, I'll let you go. I'll honor your time, but thank you so much for coming on, and those who stuck with us for this last hour and a half, thank you, and I hope that you tune in next week or the next episode for the next guest. This is Your The Vet.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Robert. Take care.
Okay.